Hi everyone, Miss Patsy here, and today we're going to be studying worms. This is a Nightcrawler, a type of earthworm, and the earthworm's anatomy is pretty simple. It's a long ringed animal. It's in the phylum Annelida, which is French for ringed or segmented, and it's basically the outside of the earthworm is very simple. They have a head at one end with a mouth. They have a clitellum, which is also called the saddle, and then they have an anus. And their body is ringed throughout. And so let's take a look up close. All right, so let's look at our worms. Can we tell which end is the tail and which end is the head? I've been observing these worms for a little while now, and they do move both forward and backwards, but mostly they move forward. So this end is the head of the Nightcrawler. Oh, and this is a red worm, which is another type of earthworm. And on this one, the head is actually on this side, and this is the clitellum, the saddle. But as you can see, it is moving backwards. And this is the head for the Nightcrawler, and the saddle is right there. And it's hard to see the saddle on the Nightcrawler because it's not as pronounced. But you can see that it's a little shade different on that end. Now look at the color of the earthworm's body. Is it the same throughout? On the Nightcrawler, the head area, the front area, is darker compared to the tail region. And on the red worm, it's about the same also. It's darker at towards the front and then lighter at the end. And can you tell the top of the earthworm from the bottom? If I flip over the red worm, you could tell it's a shade lighter on the bottom. And if I flip over the Nightcrawler, it's also lighter on the bottom. And it is also, you can tell that there's a line down the middle. Let's see. There we go. So you can see that there's a line straight down the middle. And the red worm has already flipped over. And we'll watch the Nightcrawler flip over. He's taking a little bit longer. Now look at the movement of both worms. The movement that earthworms make is called peristalsis, which is the same type of movement that our food makes through our gastrointestinal tract of humans. Now look at the rings on the worm's body. The segments are generally the same, except they look different lengths apart, especially when the worm is moving. So they get closer and then farther apart depending on the movement of the worm. See, closer, now far apart, closer, and far apart. And again, the clitellum, or the saddle, now the Nightcrawler has flipped over. The saddle is, the clitellum is Latin for saddle, and that's the swollen area of the earthworm. Now, earthworms have no eyes, no ears, and no nose. They have no lungs either, so they don't breathe like a human or other animals. Instead, they absorb their air through tiny pores in their skin and straight into their bloodstream. So worms, because they have no eyes, ears, or nose, they can't hear, see, or smell. Worms can detect light. They have light detecting cells on their bodies that can detect harmful light conditions. Ultraviolet rays of the sun are harmful to worms, so they spend most of their time underneath the ground, surface of the ground. And the worm is also very sensitive to movement, and it can sense rain approaching and other creatures who might danger them. Let's see. Worms don't always move forward. They can move backwards also, depending on what's in front of them. Now, I'm going to try to put a barrier in front of the red worm and see how it reacts. So the worm just goes along the barrier. Let me try to put a barrier in front of the Nightcrawler. Generally, the Nightcrawler usually goes over the stick. Now you can see that the Nightcrawler just pooped a little, so we do know that that end is the anus. And when the earthworm burrows through the earth, it secretes a mucus to let it slide through under the ground. And it eats the dirt as it goes through. And then once the dirt travels through, it takes all the nutrients it can from the dirt, and whatever is left over is pooped out the back. And those are called castings, worm castings. And those are very good fertilizer for soil. So worms are very good for our gardens. So if you see worms in your garden, don't kill them or throw them out. Keep them. They aerate the soil, they fertilize the soil, and they're very good for our gardens. Now let's compare the two different types of worms. The red worm is very much smaller than the Nightcrawler. And why do you think that how do you think the red worm got its name? As you can see, it is a shade of red. And the Nightcrawler, it got its name because they're most active at night. So, and they're used for fishing. So if you're wanting to go fishing and you want worms, go out digging in your garden at night to look for Nightcrawlers. And I'm going to, actually, I noticed something about the Nightcrawler when I was looking at it in the Petri dish over a light. You can actually see through the Nightcrawler, and you can see its intestines and the food traveling through the intestines. So I thought that was kind of cool. But I won't keep them on the light too long since they don't like that. So now we are actually going to add them to one of our terrariums. This terrarium is one from Mrs. Fairchild's class. It's been put together by Liam, Anne, Haruki, Adeline, and Gavin. I'm going to trim the grass a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to cut down the grass a little bit since it's a little bit overgrown. And then I'm going to cut it up and put it back in for the worms to eat. I'm going to put a few Nightcrawlers in this one, and I have another terrarium, and this one belongs to Raina, Henry, Willany, Liam, and Alexander. I think this one is from Mrs. Brown's class. I'm going to give its ryegrass a little bit of a mow also. There's not as much plant life in this one, but that's okay. Now worms, the red worms especially, are very good for vermicomposting. So I'm going to throw some, and vermicomposting is a type of composting using worms. I'm going to put some dead leaves. Actually, I'm gonna put some dead leaves in both. And I'm gonna take maybe some grass from this one and throw it in here. And I'm gonna put some shredded newspaper in both. And some apples. Now the worms will eat all of the dead leaves, the apples, the newspaper, and turn it into fertilizer for our terrariums. And we can take all of our scraps from cooking and throw them into our terrariums. I'm going to put our Nightcrawler in this one. I'm going to put our red worm in this one. I actually have a bunch of Nightcrawlers. So I'm going to, I think I'm going to put all of them in here. So this is what the earthworms all look like. They're huge. Big chubby worms. I think they'll be nice and happy in this terrarium. And I have a bunch of red worms in here I ordered. Of course, they're harder to see because they're a lot smaller. There they are. Here's a bunch of them. And I think they'll be very happy in this terrarium. And that's it for the red worms. And until next time.